All right. This recipe isn't so much made from leftovers than it is from scratch. I keep a fairly well stocked kitchen of the basics, so many recipes that I make that require carrots, celery, onion, and even parsley is pretty easily and at hand. Homemade pasta is another thing I love to make when I have an extra hour in my day. And being the season that it is, and to celebrate dear friends welcoming the birth of their first child, I decided to make some lasagna. About halfway into making the lasagna, though, I remembered something. This recipe takes a long time. Instead of brooding over how much extra work I had given myself on what was supposed to be a lazy weekend day, my mind wandered to other NBA stories that have played out over extended periods of time. Our first story starts with the player who first got me into basketball, Shaquille O'Neal. One of my earliest memories is that of Shaq pulling the entire backboard down while playing for the Orlando Magic. It was 1993. Now, Shaq had a long and, storied career in the NBA. He played for 6 different teams over 19 years. In that time, he played with some of the best players in NBA history, along with some of the best role players and NBA journeymen the league had seen. He played in the finals 5 times and won 4 rings. But even when he wasn't in the finals, a part of his NBA legacy was. You see, from 1984 until 2020, every NBA Finals featured at least one player who at one time or another called Shaq a teammate. No greater contributor than LeBron James, who played with Shaq in his first Cleveland stint and made it to the finals 8 times in a row. To start, we are going to be making pasta noodles from scratch. These are the dividing layers of the lasagna, the thing that gives it its shape instead of being another casserole. I'm making a couple of pans, so I'm upping the ratio, but typically you want about 1.5 eggs for every cup of flour and about a teaspoon of salt. Pour out the flour onto your work surface, make a crater, and crack some eggs into it. Mix the eggs slowly, pulling away flour from the sides until mostly combined. Once the egg is mostly mixed, start kneading with your hands for 7 to 8 minutes or until the dough is smooth. If the dough is crumbly and dry, coat your hands in water and continue to knead, adding more water until smooth and bouncing back when pressed with a finger. Cover with plastic wrap and let sit for at least 30 minutes up to 2 hours in the fridge. After its rest, cut into sections and begin to roll out into pasta sheets. I'm using my KitchenAid mixer attachment, but you can just as easily use a rolling pin. The pasta should be thin enough that you can see your hand through it when held up to the light. Dust heavily with flour and rest until final assembly, where they are boiled for 3 to 4 minutes in salted water. For a man as big and dominant as Shaq was, it is little surprise his imprint looms so large on the league before, during, and after he left it. Yes, you can use store-bought noodles, but for the biggest imprint, make your own. Our second story is one of sustained success. The San Antonio Spurs won their first championship in the lockout-shortened 1999 season. They were the first ABA-founded team to win a championship, and with Tim Duncan were built to smother the league with big, fundamental basketball. What they did next set an NBA record. From the year 2000 until 2017, the year after Tim Duncan retired, the Spurs won over 50 regular season games every year. 6 more years of high-pressure performance than the next closest team, the 80s Magic Lakers. Even during the lockout-shortened season of 2012, the Spurs kept the record stewing with exactly 50 wins of a possible 66. They continued to evolve in the mid-2000s, the era of dominant power forwards. With Duncan near the basket, their defense remained stingy. When the league started to pick up the pace on the heels of the 7 seconds or less Suns, the Spurs found their own speed in unselfish plays that saw the ball pop around the court like a kettle boiling, what later became known as the beautiful game. Now, let's talk sauce. We're going to be making a ragu. To start, we're going to simmer our meat. I am using some links of hot Italian sausage. In a heated stock pot, add a splash of olive oil and then the meat. Let it cook for a minute or 2 before breaking up with a wooden spoon. Continue to let it sit and then mix until the sausage is mostly cooked through and you see some bits of charred meat on the bottom of the pan. Or fond is the typical term. Remove the sausage and add the chopped veggies. realize you overestimated the pot size and switch to the big guns. Simmer the veggies for 10 to 15 minutes before adding a can of whole tomatoes and another can's worth of beef stock, a cup of red wine, and then the butter and parsley. Bring to a boil, reduce to a simmer, and mostly cover, leaving a small crack for some of the moisture to escape. Cook for 60 to 90 minutes. The Spurs were unassailable for 18 years. They were stalwart on defense and wore out their opponents on offense while barely dribbling the ball. Instead, spreading the ball around the floor with crisp passes. Each tablespoon of this sauce is as all-encompassing. And for our final story, let's talk about loyalty. A stick-togetherness as strong and weird as people who wear matching pajamas on Christmas morning. I'm talking, of course, about Tom Thibodeau and his former Bulls. In the early 2010s, the Bulls were one of the teams in the East that contended with the LeBron James Miami Heat. Derrick Rose, Joakim Noah, Luol Deng, Taj Gibson, Jimmy Butler, among others, brought a mix of sticky defense and smooth offense. Using Tibbs' defensive principles, the Bulls were mighty until overuse, injury, and consistently failing in the playoffs led to Tibbs' dismissal. The Bulls were quickly dismantled afterwards. And then Tibbs got a new head coaching job with the Minnesota Timberwolves. After 1 year of trying to coach a bunch of young players prone to the mistakes of youth, Tibbs remade the team in his image. He traded for Jimmy Butler and signed Taj Gibson. Later that same season, he signed Derrick Rose, who was unmoored, his career flailing. With the Timber Bulls, as the moniker became known, Tibbs was able to break the Wolves' 13-year playoff drought, only to get pummeled in the first round by the Houston Rockets. The following season, Tibbs brought in Luol Deng, but the mix of youth and the aged Bulls did not mesh, and Jimmy Butler demanded a trade, a move that later sealed Tibbs' fate, who was fired again. Another year break, and Tibbs was back at the helm of a team, this time the New York Knicks. His old buddy Taj Gibson again in the fray. Midway through that season, the Knicks made a trade with Detroit, again reuniting Tibbs with Derrick Rose. Tibbs led the Knicks back to the playoffs, their first appearance in 7 years, sticking to the players he knew best. To stick this whole pan together is simple: cheese and eggs. In a bowl, add ricotta cheese, mozzarella cheese, eggs, salt, and pepper. Stir until combined. For loyalty like Tibbs, it doesn't need to be complicated. It just needs to stick. After time in the oven, this cheesy, eggy mixture will bind the sauce and noodles together. When all of your ingredients are made and you can start to layer, spread a layer of sauce on the bottom of your pan and cover with pasta sheets. Add more sauce, some of the cheese mixture, before adding another layer of pasta. Repeat this process until the pan can barely handle any more. Top with another pasta layer, a little sauce, and a healthy dusting of Parmesan cheese. Place on a foil-lined baking sheet and bake at 375 for 45 minutes. Remove from the oven and allow to cool before cutting out a slice, or wrapping in foil, freezing, and bringing to your friends so they can focus more on the newborn than what's for dinner. Every great story, whether weird, historic, or communal, has to start somewhere. Welcome to the world, Mr. Miller.